Very good. Order, order. Welcome to this morning's meeting of the Culture, Media and Sport Committee. And today we're holding our fourth evidence session on children's TV and video content. And we're joined by representatives of the BBC, which is the largest provider of TV content for children and young people in the country. We're joined by the following BBC representatives: by Patricia Hidalgo, who's the Director of BBC Children's and Education, by Iain Bundred, who is the Director of Policy and Public Affairs, and by Kate Morton, who is Head of Commissioning and Acquisitions for the 0 to 6 age group. You're all very welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. And before we begin, can I also remind members to make sure that they declare any interest at the point that they ask their questions. I'm going to start, and I really want to start with you, Patricia, if I can. Your evidence called for a sustainable future funding model to be agreed as part of the Charter Review, which is ongoing at the moment. Obviously, we don't want you to prejudice your response to the Charter consultation, but are you satisfied that the government's framing of possible future funding models in its consultation paper is going to be capable of delivering that?
I think we need to think about how this industry works to begin with, because the children's media industry is the most global industry there is, in terms of different, genres. It really relies a lot on co-productions and international money to make sure that the content that we provide can go as far as it needs to in terms of volume. And in order to do that, we have actually been asking for an enhanced tax incentive, which we believe that will actually not only help us fill in those gaps, those finance gaps, to make sure that we can actually, deliver content at scale, but also will attract more investment internationally, allowing the UK producers to keep the IP within the UK, as well as to attract more international funding for more work to be done here. And that will then incentivize the whole industry, which will make it much easier for us to get better type of content, more creativity, more talent investing in children's content, and at the same time then deliver the fantastic content that we have been able to make for so many years. So it is more complicated than just having, of course, we need the sustainable funding, but we do really need to supercharge this industry at a local and international level to be able to be competitive.
So what about the timing of this? The Charter Review is ongoing at the moment. I mean, how crucial is that timing for children's TV and content for the BBC's perspective?
We've already heard from a lot of people coming here as well that the industry has already failed. It's been failing for years. And right now, we seem to be the only ones left in town. The BBC and Channel 5, to a very small extent, are the only commissioners of children's content in the UK. And that is actually happening at a global level. Public service broadcasters are the only remaining broadcasters that are actually investing in children's content. And that is a huge problem, so I think it's really important.
If I can, just about the Charter Review specifically, as Patricia said, it's absolutely critical, not just for the future of children's education, but for, frankly, all of the missions and public purposes the BBC needs to deliver in order that we have a sustainable funding mechanism. You asked a specific question about whether the framing does that. I think the framing does lead you towards that, and you'll hear more from us in the next week. And I would say anyone watching, please do respond to that consultation, because we have 1 week to go, and it's the moment for the whole public, wider public and industry to come and say, what do they want from the BBC? We'll be putting forward our proposals, which set out the need for that sustainable funding and the risks if we don't go forward. But I think Patricia's right. Children's education space is a good example of this. We have become the primary provider of it, and we're seeing that young audiences are moving online. We're seeing 72%, I believe it is, of young people's watching is actually coming from SVODs or from video sharing platforms. And so in order to keep pace, we do need a sustainable funding mechanism. I think we also need a wider market intervention, as Patricia set out.
Is it too late?
I don't think that's ever the case. I think that actually now is the time to intervene. And we've seen across the board the moment around the future of public service media that we came together with the other PSBs, not looking just at kids, but a wider need for a renewed PSB compact. The BBC has got incredible success, but now is the moment to transform. And I think about things like the success of iPlayer. So, I mean, you'll hear a lot about this from us this morning, I'm sure, but 2.2 billion views on iPlayer for kids' content. That shows that we are transforming in a positive way, that the ambitious plans we have to do more on YouTube to reach underserved audiences in particular, we can do more. But the Charter Review does come at a very timely moment in order to both set the future of BBC, but it can't be the BBC alone. It does need a wider industry intervention.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on to Damien, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. We all remember great children's telly, and some of it is because it's just good entertainment, and some of it is just it keeps you busy, it keeps you occupied. But then there is also for some output, there is an educational and developmental benefit, and there's the famous Sesame Street effect. What sort of mix do you aim for between kind of just stuff that keeps people viewing and stuff that is has some sort of higher goal? And who do you hear from in advising on what makes good health, education, development content?
I will let Kate respond on who she talks to in terms of making that content. But in terms of the mix of content that we have currently at the BBC, it has to live by our values. We're there to entertain, educate, and inform. And we really look at the content to make sure that it actually does fit those values. We don't put anything on our services that is not going to both entertain and to a certain amount also educate. Because even the most fun, crazy slapstick comedy is going to also educate. It might be about friendship, it might be about teamwork, there might be something in there that is entertaining. And it is really important, one of the things that we have been aiming to do in the past few years to attract more audiences to our services, is to make sure that we are investing in all those areas, in the content that children really want to watch, and in the content that we really want children to discover. And you can talk about...
Just before you do, presumably that is a different calculation, though, now in a world where people are selecting individual pieces of content to watch. So if you thought, well, I've got this kid for an hour, it's easier to mix in, a cartoon they're just going to enjoy with a little bit of, let's tell them about vegetables or something. But in a world, the kid's never going to pick the vegetable program. So how does that world change? Or how does your role change in this kind of self-selection model?
We identified a few years ago, actually about 5 years ago, that we heavily relied on live action and factual entertainment content, and there wasn't enough animation. And we were seeing children actually leaving the BBC to go to competitors to search for that animation. Yeah. So we have changed our strategy to increase the amount of animation that the BBC provides. Both first we basically got dispensation from Ofcom, because animation takes 3 to 4 years to make, to acquire that animation, and then we, at the same time, we put in place development content, animation content development, so that we could actually be delivering that animation. So we have basically used tactics, so looked at what are the children coming for, and where do we want to do it. And actually, we did have a conversation with Ofcom about this, because they wanted to see, the results of this experiment or strategy. And I'm very happy to say that we could actually prove that children that had not been coming to the BBC before were coming for an animated program, and then were going on to watch Dumping Ground and Horrible Histories. So that was what we aiming for. Bring them in, make sure that they, that what they're going to watch is wholesome, but then that you can then take them into the content that we're commissioning.
I wonder if just as a follow-up to say, don't expect you to have it in front of you, but you might be able to give us something quantified about the change over time from live action to cartoon or whatever the other formats, and that would be quite interesting. Sorry, I cut across you. We're just handing over to Kate to talk about inputs.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. One thing in terms of how we make these decisions, where do we get the data, who are we talking to? We are very reliant on really tapping into our audience. We do think audience first, and we use focus groups and lots of research, but also the data tells a story. And when we're talking about animations that the children are coming to, these aren't necessarily not nutritious. We've got a whole series of fantastic animations which are very, very educationally rich. Number blocks, colour blocks, wonder blocks. I don't know if you're aware of these programs, but a whole generation of children are now starting school with an understanding about numeracy and how numbers work because of number blocks. In the last 6 months, there were, I think, 39 million views of number blocks on iPlayer.
Ollie from Blue Zoo has been in your
Yes, Ollie, Ollie's a fantastic advocate for educative content. And we're very, very happy to have and supported that content on the BBC. And so other shows like Hey Dougie, hugely important in terms of social skills and emotional intelligence and emotional learning as well. So there's a lot of nutritious value within our animated as well as our live action and content. But we make decisions about what works and what we should be commissioning more also on that performance. We're very lucky. CBeebies and BBC are the number 1 and 2 channels in the linear space, and our top programmes on BBC Children's get more views than Disney and Netflix combined, their top children's content. So we actually have data to go on to say what is working, therefore what is appealing, but also working with trusted experts to make certain our content is really delivering on our public service values of...
Does the data or the research tell you anything about the relative benefit or disbenefit of binge watching a single show, 10 episodes, versus having a line of varied content, including maybe a bit of animation, a bit of live action, a little bit of news, old-fashioned channels, what we used to call a channel. I think Iain maybe was going to...
Yeah, I was going to say, I think this speaks to sort of thinking about prominence in the round. And that's obviously why we're doing more with YouTube and others, and with all our kind of strategies, we're trying to bring as much people onto iPlayer where we have that wider ability to serve audiences in that environment. I think one thing that's interesting is
you can still just binge on a single program on iPlayer.
You absolutely can, but I think that the in fact, my 9-year-old son sometimes does, I must admit. But I think there's something about how you're trying to expose them to different types of types of content. Now, other platforms do that as well. I'm not saying that we're unique in doing so. I think now the audience experience is such that the minimum they demand is a large content library to try different things. But we obviously use a very bespoke environment in order to try and make sure it's the best possible, both inform, educate and entertain experience for younger people. But it is an interesting question as we think about sort of policy interventions about how do we ensure that kind of mixed diet is delivered in other spheres, particularly video sharing.
I'm sorry to slightly press you there. Does the data tell you anything? Is there a benefit or a disbenefit to having like in the olden days when someone would watch an hour's worth or an hour and a half's worth, whatever it was, and there was a variety? Does that matter?
We haven't actually done, a piece of research on that variety per se, but the way that we actually, the tactics that we use to make sure that kids stay with us for longer is actually that we will surface. So within iPlayer, we will actually surface content that is alike or a kind to the content they've just watched. So something that we know that they might like. We do a lot of, if you watch this, you might like to watch that. I just need to say this. as I was today, I was coming over and we were kind of discussing some of the subjects, and the taxi driver suddenly said, "Can I add something?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "I think what you're saying is right. My children actually are watching more children's content when they come to iPlayer than when they go to Netflix. When they come to iPlayer, after they've watched one show, they go and find another children's show. When they go to Netflix, I don't know what they're watching." I'm just kind of repeating what this man said.
And our socioeconomic report published today has some data as well as the focus group of the taxi driver.
But I just had to say it because it made me smile, to think that you get this response, somebody is listening and actually that appreciation for what we're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Liz.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask you, Patricia, if you think that children's TV is a viable business.
Well, I don't believe right now it's a viable business. I mean, we've seen, what's happened with the advertising restrictions have really made it. We are seeing children's channels closing all the time, and then on top of that, if you think about the streaming, as we have moved linear into streaming, streamers actually don't see children as an acquisition audience; they see them as a retention audience. Now, if you've got already over 5,000 hours in your streaming service, you might think, maybe we don't need to invest anymore. So we have an issue there, that if the streaming world is not going to start investing in children, then this business, it's going to be very tough to sustain.
Thank you. Thanks, Liz. Bye.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everybody. So in the evidence, I'll probably come to all three of you, but I'll start with yourself, Patricia. But in the evidence, it was referred that there's like a global retreat from commissioning children's content on the biggest platforms. How's this sort of impacting your sort of like ability to source and work with sort of co-production partners?
It's really impacted, but we have worked extremely, extremely hard to make sure that we do get those partners, especially from other public service broadcasters. We are talking all the time with the likes of France Television, RAI, Televisión Española, all of the Nordics. In fact, we're currently in conversations with the Nordics, with the whole of the Nordics public service broadcasters to see how we can come together and collaborate more. Last year, our slate actually relied on 23% of the income to that budget coming from international co-production partners. So if that goes, that's going to be a bigger issue as well.
Into the UK, 23%.
Into the UK, 23% of our budget was coming from those co-production partners.
Kate, do you like to elaborate?
Yeah, thank you. There has been a very big change. We last year had the quite shocking statistic that the BBC was the #1 commissioner of global children's content, and that's not because we've increased our amount of content. We've stayed stable. It's that the US in particular and other commercial streamers, etc., have literally fallen away. And so we are getting more and more pitches and more submissions from UK independent production companies, but also international ones, because we are, as Patricia was saying, literally the only game in town. In terms of the co-productions and the work that we're doing, the other thing that I think is very notable is how appealing the BBC is internationally in terms of a mark of quality. I go a lot to international markets, television markets, etc., and there's always an amazing reaction from international attendees who are saying, wow, the BBC, this is something that you're interested in because of our quality, our ability to actually make content that actually works. And BBC content is sold to 130 countries worldwide at the moment. So we're talking about a real viable export of content. in terms of, shows that you're talking about, this isn't necessarily just animation. In terms of dramas, we are one of the few creators of children's drama. We've got 90 hours of children's drama this year. And this is one show which is, I'm trying to remember the name of it, A Kind of Spark, which was by Elle McNichol, about a diverse, neurodiverse character, and she's a neurodiverse writer. That's been sold to Australia, France, New Zealand, the Netherlands. So, you're talking a 7+ drama, which is really exciting, compelling. It was filmed, there's a couple of seasons. The first season was filmed in Cheshire, the second was in Northern Ireland. So we're talking really amazing content that really does travel. And those kind of appeal internationally, which is why we have such great relations, as Patricia was saying, with public service broadcasters. So we've got a fantastic platform, but we just need more assistance to be able to get more injection into the marketplace, so that we are not the only people who are supporting these important UK creatives.
No, thank you. Iain, sorry, before I come to you, Kate, you just, that last point sort of threw up a question in my mind. Obviously, you're talking about 130 countries. It shows a viability. We understand the strength of UK culture is such sort of internationally. That's an asset. That's something that we can sort of export. Can more be done? You just ended with more support. Can more be done in terms of increasing that market with regards to the content that we produce that generates more income for the organisation?
Want to take that on the tax?
Yeah, I think I'll hand over to Patricia just to talk a little bit more on the tax credit.
We come into tax.
Is that,
yes, we are.
If that answers your question.
Okay.
We're literally coming to it next.
We're coming to tax. Yeah. Okay, so just park that. Yeah. Iain, can I come to you, sir?
Yeah, I think there's a real danger here that the next generation will grow up without culturally relevant content. I think that's a big point. There's lots of reasons why we've got where we have, but now BBC provides 86% of PSP content in this space, and that's not the place we want to be. We also see that we're, as Patricia and Kate have discussed, we're by far the largest commissioner of new content. And I think that goes back to this content library point. Why invest in new content when kids are really engaging in older stuff, and as kids churn through, new ones be exposed? We obviously have a unique business model. We're very lucky to have that. We hope the Charter Review keeps that unique business model going in many ways. But what we can't lose is this sense that that British stories, regional accents, the kind of special pieces that are done are lost. And that has a big impact. You heard from Pact in a previous session, I believe. It has a big impact on the wider indie sector as well. I would say that there is definitely an audience out there for new stories in this space. And I look at sort of the strength of YouTube creators and some of the large companies that are being spun up from this. That there is an audience out there for new storytelling, and we just have to find the way to reach them. And we have to make sure that we get the economics right, so that sort of that indie sector in particular has the opportunity to tell those stories in new formats.
Thank you. We understand, sort of, given the challenges sort of facing the market with regards to sort of co-productions, what are we doing to, I suppose, find more partners, find the next generation of sort of co-producing partners? What are we doing?
Well, we go to all the markets. We talk constantly with our colleagues across the globe, not just Europe. We are actually currently, as I said, we're speaking with the Nordics, with all the Nordic cohort of public service.
And sorry, Patricia, just to cut across you there. In terms of sort of UK partners.
Oh, UK partners.
Yes. Right across the, I'm sure colleagues within their own constituencies, we have a number of sort of small and independent.
So yes, so we work with the likes of Netflix and Disney. We absolutely, have no problem in sharing content with them and windowing with them. It all depends, where the money is. if we are investing, the higher amount of money, we expect, to have that first window because, we want to give that value back to the license fee payer. But we're very open to share content.
I think, though, probably in terms of smaller companies, things like a program like Ignite,
more indie.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of finding new talent, but also supporting studios across the UK, we have launched a project called Ignite, which was then, about how do we develop new ideas and new voices in the animation space. And we spent so far about £1 million in developing about 80 different shows with creators and talent across the UK. It's a very unique project. Of that project, we have already got 3 commissions of 3 series. It takes time. It takes about 3 or 4 years, from the concept from finding a concept all the way into, creating a show. And I'm very happy to say that we have done that. That doesn't just include that talent. It includes studios. So we have, agreements with animation studios across the UK to produce that content with us, which we will commission. So that's just one example. Another example is we have a diversity and inclusion fund that we have been having for the last 5 years. That's about £200,000 every year that go to indies so that they can actually hire talent, diverse talent into the commissions that we actually make, so supporting them to find that creative talent from diverse backgrounds, minority diverse backgrounds that they might not have in their productions. So we're continuously, actively looking at how we can help the industry create more, wholesome content, but also become more diverse.
And I just encourage you to have quite slightly speedier answers because we've got quite a lot of questions to get through.
Iain?
I was going to say, also part of our YouTube announcement at the start of the year was about having a series of training sessions for creators in 6 different clusters across the UK. So that's another example of how we're looking into that creator space I mentioned earlier.
Okay, and in terms of sort of like the IP, do you own the IP with regards to these co-productions?
So we don't own the IP of our commissions. That's not, the IP is owned by the indie.
Okay. In terms of what sort of percentage of your co-productions with public service broadcasters are from other countries?
So, as I said before, we've got about 23% of money coming from international. I don't know the exact percentage of those co-productions, but in terms of the budget, 23% of our budget actually is funded by international co-production partners.
We can send that as a follow-up.
But we can send that for you.
And my last question, are there any other areas, are you identifying new regions for growth, other sort of territories?
We are looking all the time. I mean, we can see, that when there is more, interesting tax incentives in one or another market, that there is more investment or more willingness to invest in children's content. So we will always kind of go and talk to those countries and to those public broadcasters sitting in those markets to see if they would, come and collaborate and also create content here, also in the UK.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pai. Jeff.
Thanks, Chair. And I need to declare an interest as the recently elected Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on the BBC. I want to talk a little bit about financial support. Patricia, you proposed an extra uplift in the tax credit for culturally relevant children's content.
Yes.
Can you just talk to us about what you want to achieve with that?
Basically, currently the tax credits for UK made shows, because they're not necessarily culture relevant.
Yeah.
As you know, I know very well from having being beneficiary of that tax incentive, making The Amazing World of Gumball, which is a very American show, but made it here in the UK. So currently it's 26%. That's below any other country across Europe, first of all. Secondly, it doesn't actually ensure that the content that is going to be made is culturally relevant, as I just said before. You can make a very American show, which is great because it helps the industry, but it doesn't actually make sure that the content is culturally relevant. If we think that the independent films have actually been given a higher, threshold because they are considered to be in danger, children is also in danger of, as an industry. I believe that if we could increase that tax incentive, not without allowing people to come and use that 26%, but through a point system which already exists there. You've got the BFI point system. I believe you have 16% that you actually need to hit to do something that is a UK works. If you put it up to, let's say, 24%, to make sure that it was culture relevant, not only you would make it more cultural, but you would actually, in that way, make it more attractive for international broadcasters and also national broadcasters and streamers to invest in children's content. Because if you think about it, there's already a directive that obliges anybody broadcasting within Europe to carry European content. Now, if children's content is given an enhanced tax incentive, it will make it more interesting for streamers to invest in children's content in the UK. That's how we see it.
Yeah. Okay. How do you know that? What assessment have you made of the attractiveness of the UK in that context?
Well, we already know the Britishness sells. We're already, in a really challenged market, bringing, 23% investment from international in these challenging times. We're already being quite successful in doing it. If we were to actually increase that tax incentive and be much more attractive than, let's say, France, who is at 35%, having not just the English language, but also the most creative industry in the world. Think about it, all the best and most well-known IPs for children come from here. And, we have an incredible opportunity to attract international investment because Britishness sells. But right now, there's not enough incentive for those foreign countries to come here. They would rather take the work outside because it's cheaper to make it outside.
Right. Okay. And you mentioned that in the enhanced incentive for independent films. Are you aware of any work that's going on to assess the impact of that?
No, I am not. I am not aware.
Okay. And this proposal, presumably you've had some discussions with Treasury or DCMS. What response have you had, if any?
Yeah, I think I can do that. We continue to advocate for this and a number of incentives across the industry. I would say, the government has been open to the ideas, I think, but we recognise it's a constrained fiscal environment. This is why, actually, I think tax credits are most appealing. They're probably the easiest thing for Treasury to sign off because they don't have a direct, immediate impact. I think we could go further, and it would be really helpful if the committee did support the idea to endorse that and to sort of understand the DCMS's response to it formally, because I think it's about now is to the chair's point. I think now is the time for intervention, and actually we need some action quite quickly rather than just sort of ongoing conversations in this space.
Could you send us the data that you do have on the international comparators when it
Absolutely.
comes to enhanced tax credits?
Yeah. And on those, do any of those have some sort of culturally influential criteria?
They absolutely do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially in France. It's
Okay.
all about, it has to be made in France, it
Yeah.
has to have French writers, directors, so they do have that criteria.
Yeah. If you could send us all of that,
Yeah.
that would be really helpful. Thank you, chaps.
that would be really
Jeff,
helpful.
I do apologise for interrupting.
No, that's all right. No, I just want to go on to the talk about the Young Audience Content Fund a little bit, because we've had, in the course of our inquiry, we've had some quite, a large number of people saying that it's a great idea and quite enthusiastic about some form of Young Audience Content Fund. Why is the BBC maybe less enthusiastic about it?
Shall I start and then?
You can start.
Yeah. So, I think first thing is that the previous Young Audience Content Fund was taken as a top slice from the BBC licence fee, and we don't think that's appropriate. And so I think there's a particular point there, which is anything should come from additionally from from government resources. I think there's a second order element as well, which is about stimulating demand. And I think, how do we make the best case to the Treasury? Our belief is that a tax credit regime goes with the grain of Treasury thinking, is much easier to deliver. I think we then come to the sort of the final points around what worked last time and where it didn't necessarily make genuine change on meeting audience demand. And I worry that, and perhaps Patricia can talk a little bit more around the learnings from it. That's not to say that we're against it per se. We think tax credit's more effective. If there was to be a young audience content fund, we'd happily work with whoever designed that regime to make sure it's as effective as possible and learn some of the mistakes from the last time around. But we did feel last time it didn't have the impact that we would have wanted it to.
Right, okay.
Yeah, well, we basically, we didn't feel it had the impact it had. And the purpose, if the purpose of it was not just to create more content, but actually to get that content to reach, the desired audience, the impact was not there. So it has to be very carefully thought through. How is it going to work this time? Of course, we welcome more money in the market, but, you need scale. You need skin in the game to make sure that whatever you're producing actually reaches that audience. We know we're there every day. It's like being, on the trenches. We're continuously fighting for our content to rise up and to be consumed by audiences. That just one more point on that. Of course, we're doing a good job. 2.2 billion views, 750 million hours of children's content viewed on iPlayer last year. But we need more support, prominence. And I know that others have asked for that. I think that would go a long way to help us make sure that we add to that reach that we have already, more reach in those platforms that we don't control.
So in your Patricia, in your speech to the Children's Media Summit, you said, I'm quoting, platforms that succeed with children must share responsibility and invest accordingly.
Yes.
So two things, I suppose. One, you're calling for them presumably to provide some upfront finance, and which specific platforms are you referring to there?
Well, in general, I think if you are in the business of attracting children's eyeballs, you have a responsibility, Otherwise, don't be in that business. It's fine. We're not saying everybody should be, in the business of attracting children. But if you're doing that, then you have a responsibility to that audience. That's all I meant to say. And again, as I say, there is a European, quota directive for content to be made in Europe. Now, there isn't a specification of that content being the genre being for children. But I do know that currently, there is that is being looked into by the EBU. They are actually looking at the that quota again, that European quota again. If the UK still is considered as a European country that for European works, I also know that there's lobbying going on by producers across Europe to actually ask for a part of that quota to be dedicated to children. So if that happens, and we have this tax incentive of culture relevant content for children, you just need to see how that would actually work really well in our favour.
You'd presumably support some type of YAC fund if it was paid for by the video sharing platforms and international streamers?
I certainly think that could be appealing, and I think our focus would be that it doesn't come from the licence fee.
And just on your speech, Patricia, you referred to the levies in France and Germany. So do they only apply to subscription streamers, or and not video sharing platforms like YouTube?
I don't know that they do it to YouTube. I don't know if they're deciding to do that, but I do know that it's not just the streaming platforms, it's also linear channels. It's all broadcasters.
Okay.
I think Canada has some rules on YouTube from memory.
Right, okay. So you said, Iain, you think that the tax credit is a better solution than the YAC fund. If the YAC fund was funded by a levy on streamers and YouTube, would you still take that view?
I think we absolutely want intervention in favour of kids' TV. I think the challenge, I would say, is we want action now, not being dragged through slow process and challenged in trade negotiations, etc., etc. So I really would be focused on what are the things that, and we obviously have a spring statement today. We're not expecting anything in that. I don't think anyone's expecting very much in that. But I think there's a question about how do we come together. Those who care about kids' television, those in Parliament, and make a coherent case for urgent and immediate intervention, and that feels like where tax credits has the best chance of success, and actually be able to move quickly to stimulate demand across the whole industry.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. Can I just take you back? Jeff just asked you, Patricia, in your recent speech about the Children's Media Summit, when you said platforms that succeed with children must have shared responsibility and invest accordingly. Jeff asked you which specific platforms you were referring to, and you just said all of them. Could we just try and very gently invite you off of the fence to be a little bit more specific, please?
What I said is not all of them. Is anybody actually is you don't necessarily have to, be attracting children to your platform. But if you do, if that is your business model, you want that audience, those eyeballs, you have to have a responsibility.
Like who? Who are we thinking about? When you made that comment, who were you thinking of?
Well, currently we've got all streamers are actually targeting children, and they are taking those eyeballs. So if that's the case, it's important that there is a balanced diet that they're actually providing to that audience. They can't rely just on the BBC to provide that balance. It needs to be also, in whatever they are providing to children. I think, YouTube is another example, but actually, that's a different type of, they don't invest in children's content, but the content that actually goes into YouTube, because currently, yes, Ofcom said 20% of the content viewed in the UK by UK, users comes from the UK. Only 20% on YouTube. Actually, we've just run our own research. For children, it's only 15%. So this is more about prominence. If you think about YouTube, I don't think for YouTube is for them to invest, because they don't invest in making content. It's others that put the content in there. And there's loads of fantastic British content on YouTube. It's just not surfacing.
Yes, we do.
So if we could surface that content, that could be, a way to make it, that children actually benefit from that. So
I think we're going to investigate that a little bit more now. First of all with Liz, and then with Rupa. Liz.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to focus on the BBC and YouTube strategic partnership, which was announced in January. If I can ask you, Iain, what does the BBC get out of this partnership?
Well, I think there's a real reflection of how audience habits are changing. And I should say, I think possibly one of the reasons why I was directed towards me, I spent 5 years at YouTube before I joined the BBC last year. Yeah. And I was taken by the seriousness with which the company already, and by that I mean BBC, already took YouTube, but felt that it hadn't even really started. And you see that in kids, right? We've had some really great successes, and Kate may want to talk through some of the work we've done over 20 years on YouTube, kids in particular. But there's a sense that there are underserved audiences there that are not currently getting the culturally relevant content that the BBC has a mission and public purpose to deliver, but also that we think we have an opportunity to reach a more universal audience of doing that. So I think there's a kind of, it's actually a win-win here of more audiences there that we aren't necessarily reaching on our services, an ability to test and learn as well. For example, there's a great example with CBeebies House where we got roughly 900,000 audience on YouTube and about 900,000 on iPlayer, but the iPlayer audience was actually stayed for longer. So that's an interesting data point and understanding how our different places work. But that was originally launched with a YouTube audience in mind. So creating content and getting advice from partner managers and others, which is part of our exciting agreement, helps us to transform as we go forward towards meeting that. Ultimately, though, we still, the best place for the long-term sustainability of the BBC and for our growth will be on iPlayer and our own services. Of course, it will be, but there are audiences there that we need to meet, and we can do so.
Has YouTube actually given anything up for this partnership?
There are certain bits that they're doing around in kids' space around they would call it prominence in terms of different sort of boxes that we get some improved discoverability. I think it's still early days around that. I mentioned to Bio the work that's going on in terms of training programs, which I think they're being very supportive of, where they're helping us find new creators. So there's a lot of work done there. But I would say this is a first agreement, and the real point here is about trying to find ways to make sure that we are improving the quality content that we're delivering to YouTube and finding the best-in-class ways to meet the audiences there. I don't know whether you want to talk, I think, Patricia, about the specific agreement in kids.
Well, we don't have any specific agreement, but we are working with YouTube, with the YouTube Kids team, to make sure that we are, giving them content around themes, whatever is happening, so Safe Internet Day, or whether it's Christmas or anything that has relevance for us as well as for them. But what we have seen is we have been working with YouTube channels. BBC Children's YouTube channels have been on YouTube for a long time. CBBC is a very big channel for the BBC. We actually have had 520 million views of that channel just in the last year, and it actually continues to grow. So we're really happy with what's happening there, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the latest originals that we have been producing and how we've done that.
Yes, Iain mentioned CBeebies House Time to Play, which really is a bit like a play school for today's preschoolers. We were lucky enough to have Baroness Benjamin actually presenting, and it's a very It's very nutritious content that is quite slow-paced. It's really focused on engaging directly. It's quite an intimate show because you actually feel a little bit like you're actually in the room with the presenter. And it's educational content, quite a lot about school readiness, so literacy, numeracy, emotions, mindfulness. But it's all done in a very playful way, in the same way that, those of us that remember Play School, it has that similar kind of reassuring, trusted by parents, and safe approach to the content. We also have done other content, reimagining of Blue Peter, and our new version of Blue Peter has had great uptake on YouTube and on iPlayer, and really enhanced performance. Our recent episode had I think 270,000 views on iPlayer, so really significant. It's a test and learn environment, and that's the brilliant thing about being in that space where that audience is, because we have to go outside of our BBC bubble to where that audience is and reach them. And then bring them and show them the wealth of the balanced diet that the BBC offers.
Okay, Iain, does the partnership provide any assurance on improving prominence for BBC content on YouTube?
Not currently. I think if you look at it across the whole piece, we're really excited about the partnership. We think we're doing some great work, but there's further to go, I believe, in discoverability. There are certain measures, and I think you've got YouTube coming to give evidence soon, and so that I'm sure they'll talk a little bit about what they can and can't offer. But we feel there's more that can be done about prominence on video sharing platforms in general, and YouTube in particular, which goes back to Patricia's point about if at the moment only 15% of kids and about 20% of the overall audience are seeing UK stories on that platform, are we really getting enough culturally relevant content there? And so the PSBs are fantastic providers of this. There's also a fantastic UK YouTube creator ecosystem, right? But there has to be something, and we're working about something that doesn't try and break the algorithm or the recommendation systems, but goes with the grain of audience behaviours and what audience expectations are to improve discoverability of PSB content.
And how does the BBC earn revenue from placing its content on YouTube?
We don't currently earn revenue on public service content. There's actually a question in the Charter Review about whether we should. I won't preempt that, but I would say that the incremental revenues that are available on YouTube are significant. But in terms of replacing, for example, the licence fee, I don't think it starts to make much of a difference. I think other PSBs have struggled beyond kids' content to deliver long-term sustainable funding. I thought it was very interesting. I was at the Royal Television Society conference where we heard from, for example, a fantastic UK kids media company called Moonbug. One of their investors was talking about how actually the money they make from YouTube, and it's an enormous business doing great work, but the money they make from YouTube is often around the IP around it, rather than actually in the revenue sharing and advertising space. And I think there is a challenge here about how do you create sustainable businesses through the revenue sharing model. They have a fantastic thing, and they offer a lot more than, for example, TikTok or Instagram do. But it's just a different point. And if we go back to how do we ensure we're driving new commissions of quality British content, I think it's not going to be through advertising. I think it's going to be through whether it's tax credits or other pieces.
In your written evidence, you said that YouTube do not provide information on the content which they publish, which grows by an average of 20 million videos every single day. In your view, is YouTube a publisher?
Funny enough, this is the thing that came up for years when I was always asked this sort of platform as a publisher. It was never a line that I was ever asked to give, actually, funny enough. Is YouTube a publisher? I think they're a platform, right? They are different. There are certain areas where they do publish, but I think their main focus has been around distribution. It's a different piece. I see it more akin to, if you look at the kind of future of TV debates and how the YouTubers present themselves as a future TV, I think it's more about how do we reach our audience and how do we work with them as a distribution channel. That's where discoverability and prominence is so important. I think it's worth noting at this point that the Media Act is still not fully implemented. It doesn't include video sharing platforms. We don't want a must-offer, must-carry style regime, but we do want changes that deliver on helping British audiences find culturally relevant UK content, because that is a massive challenge for society, frankly. And I think there's more that we can be done with that particular platform and others.
Okay, thank you.
But Iain, just to push you a little bit on this, your evidence says YouTube do not provide information on the content which they publish. Surely the implication of that is that they are a publisher.
I'm not saying. I've always found this thing a slightly esoteric debate, but I believe there is video sharing platforms are just different to the wider pieces of linear channels and
but there's a
streams.
lot tied up. I mean, you sort of slightly glibly dismissed that, but the fact is there's quite a lot tied up in that. If they were defined as a publisher, then there would be a whole realm of implications from that at the moment YouTube are not subject to. So, I mean, if you were in our boat, for example, if you were making recommendations as a select committee, what would you be saying?
I would say I would focus on video sharing platforms and what UK society needs from video sharing platforms. They're growing increasingly. They're massively important in audiences. I feel as though, for example, trying to create a copy of the regime for smart televisions onto VSPs doesn't work. So I would look at them in the sphere of where they are, of which YouTube is one of them.
Yeah.
In terms of their liability and responsibility, I think they do have a different point. I mean, I was always struck by how much was invested in content safety and in, for example, the trust and safety programs going over there, which took on a certain level of responsibility. They don't upload their own content very much, so I just think that's a slightly different point.
But they do sort of collate it, don't they? I mean, it is sort of fed to our consumers. What I was interested to know is if you're making content tailored to succeed on YouTube, how do you resist the temptation to make content to please the algorithm rather than content that's nourishing for the child?
And I think that's exactly the test that we have to judge all of our interventions, both as a BBC, but also what any regulatory regime goes forward. I think there's actually this almost philosophical difference here, isn't there? About can we upload the most perfect content to satisfy the recommendation systems of a video sharing platform, versus should the video sharing platform actually be recognising what public service media and the kind of nourishing mixture of pieces do? And I think there is a point where those two need to meet. A starting point, and this is a huge amount of work that Patricia and the team are doing in kids space, is making sure that the content we do upload is YouTube first, is optimised for that. And that's not just about particular trends that are popular. It's actually about making sure that, for example, it's not just a cut down or a short clip from our own existing routine, but we've spoken to the best YouTube creators to learn about what works in that space. But there will be certain things that perform better on in the recommendation systems. I think particularly I'm thinking in adult spaces here that aren't necessarily what we would say is the best work. So I think there's work to be done there about improving discoverability and making sure that our systems all speak together well.
What do you think about what when Ted Sarandos was over in the UK a couple of weeks ago and was interviewed on the Today programme and talked about YouTube as a competitor for TV, and he said, what surprises me all the time is the studios and networks around the world, including the BBC, continue to feed them YouTube free programmes. There's probably a better distribution relationship than just turning over your content and making pennies on the dollar. What do you think?
Well, I noticed that Netflix said this morning that they wanted us to be on their distribution platform. So I think that do you know what? I think this speaks to the challenge of the wider industry, which is that we're in a scale game. And we're so lucky in the UK to have iPlayer, which last year was the fastest growing SVOD in the country. We're so lucky to have a scaled platform that can compete with Netflix and YouTube as well. But there are still audiences that we're missing. And we talked about CBeebies House. It's a great example of how we can try and bring others into bring audiences in to iPlayer and try different things and learn from it. So I in the same way that we Hey Dougie's on Netflix and we have more YouTube content on both on iPlayer but on YouTube. There's more we can do here, but we, as I said earlier, the best experience for us will always be on our own content services. But what we can't do, because we have we're a universal service and want to remain universal, is just stay within a walled garden.
I'm going to go to Damien and then I'm going to Rupert.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up very quickly on that question about ad revenue in YouTube. So obviously people on YouTube are used to there being ads. I mean, almost all content must have pre-roll and whatever they call mid-roll ads and so on. I mean, do you consider you're not allowed to have revenue? Because the customer the viewer hasn't gone to a BBC property. They've gone to a third-party property. In the same way, I mean, there are places that BBC News content appears that have ads. They're just not your ads.
Yeah.
I mean, do they offer you money and you said no thanks, or what? I mean, how does this? What was the decision-making process?
So I think let's take it in steps. Right. First, it's worth saying that in terms of studios content, overseas content, we do allow advertising. I'm talking about public service content. There's a question about whether we're allowed to serve advertising on public service content, and we did have that debate. And whether I think with discretion from the Secretary of State, you can do so. So and it does, as you say, run with the grain of the platform. We chose not to do that currently. And there's a question in the Charter Review about whether we should. And I would argue, and you'll see more from us on this in the next week, just 1 week to go. I just want to repeat that on Charter Review responses. But there is a question about whether it's the right thing. And by what I mean is, do audiences, where they see BBC content, feel they've already paid for it in terms of paying for the licence fee? There's then a question about pragmatically, how much does it raise and does it actually drive much? And our analysis is that if we uploaded the whole of iPlayer onto YouTube, we'd probably raise something in the million of 30 to 50 million.
Isn't there another question as well? So what is it, 55, 45?
45. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's your half, but there's also their half. So if they're not getting any remuneration for showing your content, do you think that helps you in the algorithm?
We've had a lot of reassurances in the past, and from my 5 years there, I've never had any sense that not being advertised punishes what's is restricted in the content. What I would say though is that is always subject to change. And there is something around kind of regulatory backstops, etc., about whether you would be notified if that was changed, whether you would just see it in your things. But I've got no evidence, and I don't think we've certainly had reassurances that we're not punished, so to speak, because of it. I don't think that's the way the YouTube incentive is, because they're really focused on what the audience wants. To Dame Caroline's point, arguably sometimes they might be focused on audience wants rather than what the audience needs, but that's a different debate.
So I'm speaking out of turn here, so I'm trying to be as quick as possible. Just to check, everything you just said about YouTube, does that also apply to Meta and to TikTok?
No, because they don't offer anywhere near the same revenue sharing opportunities.
No, well, I meant not taking the revenue sharing.
Yeah, I'm not aware of this taking ads on.
And you don't think that disadvantages you in their
I'd have
recommender systems.
Well, I mean, we're the number one news brand on Instagram globally.
Yeah.
So that would suggest that we're not doing so bad there, so to speak.
Although they do famously change their algorithms
honestly, and I think
with no notice to anybody.
We talked about the appropriate regime for video sharing platforms earlier. I think some of this point around regulatory oversight of changes is a massive debate, and transparency and frankly an ability for us to be able to build a business model that encourages us to meet audiences where they are in places like that, but do so in a way that we can rely on it. There is that famous pivot to video thing with Meta, which was a massive challenge for the wider industry. I don't know about the BBC, it was before my time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Rupert.
Thanks, and thank you all. I think a lot of people in this room were in Manchester the other week, so good to see you on home turf. And if I'm declaring an interest, I'm a former member of staff in a section that doesn't exist anymore. I think the BBC Popular Music Library in the 90s. Probably been rationalised out of existence. And my sister was the longest serving female presenter of Blue Peter over the late 90s and early 00s. I guess my questions are mainly for Iain. They're about, we're carrying on the YouTube theme, about a possible voluntary agreement for prominence on YouTube. Just what discussions have taken place with public service broadcasters and YouTube on to ensure that content is prominent? You know, before you turn on a telly, there were only 3/4 channels, and it went to BBC One, whereas now this fight for prominence with the smart TVs.
I think there's been a lot of discussions. The thing I know, there's been a lot of discussions both with YouTube but also with DCMS about whether more could be done here. The Secretary of State made clear at RTS Cambridge last year that she would regulate, they would legislate if needed, but they wanted to see voluntary arrangements in the first place. I think in the kids space, YouTube does offer some improvements on discoverability for BBC in particular. I think for PSBs more generally, but not that many are able to use that. But there is a long way to go.
And I've been looking at your report. Well done. Really nice looking report. So I think you said 72% of young viewers come to stuff via video sharing, and this thing says that you've got 4 times more output on children's TV than everything put together, not just the public service broadcasters. So do you think voluntary is going to be good enough? I mean, maybe some...
No, we've said at the same conference actually, all the PSBs came together and said that we wanted to see regulation.
Fair commercial terms as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of changes that we need to see to really sustain the public service media ecosystem. One of them is prominence, and I mentioned the Media Act earlier. I think there's also concerns about even implementing the Media Act fully, because I don't know if you've seen the kind of latest Ofcom guidance, but they're basically saying that prominence should be no worse than it was beforehand, which isn't what I think, which is what we read as being what Parliament passed last time round. So there's a bunch of changes about prominence, both existing and going forwards on video sharing platforms. There's then financial incentives, both tax credits, not just in the kids space, but wider interventions there. And there's 3 other elements, one around partnerships, one around distribution, and sort of a switch over. And one around news, because I think there's a particular focus, which I know this committee's looked at before, around whether whether all audiences are able to find sustained news, because it's a business model that is like children's is struggling.
I think there's some news round questions in a bit, but I just wondered, isn't there a sense that the sort of window for trying to persuade YouTube to achieve prominence without legislation passed is disappearing?
I think that's a question you can ask YouTube directly around that. I would say...
They're mysteriously elusive. They are trying to get them.
I would say that
notoriously
we've seen... I mean, we've seen that now there's a real appetite around the world to regulate and legislate video sharing platforms and social media platforms. So I think now is the time to intervene. And I believe that, on voluntary solutions, I go back to the conversation I was having with Damien. Without reassurance on data and access, voluntary solutions are always slightly taken on trust. So a regulatory backstop is always helpful, and I think is necessary, and that's why we've come together as all PSBs to campaign and argue for that intervention. So we would support that, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't also be having constructive conversations with YouTube and others about how do we make sure that users have access to the best BBC content, particularly given that societal challenge we have, where so few culturally relevant content is available on their platform.
Again, this report seems to show that public service broadcasting for kids is shrinking. ITV doesn't do it anymore. Channel 4's not done it forever. Even in America, Trump has signed an executive order to stop public service broadcasting. That's Sesame Street. I mean, I know you said most things are associated with the UK, but Big Bird, really? I mean, it does feel that there's a sort of shrinking space there. And for what is left, have you come across this idea of a kite marking or traffic light system, a sort of, I don't know, under one trusted front door? Because there's so much rubbish that spews out on YouTube that maybe parents can have guidance on what's good, and maybe you can set a filter on the thing. You know, I'm a parent myself. Yeah. God knows what they're looking at half the time.
I saw it was referenced in a previous hearing. I think our focus is probably on the content production and making sure we're stimulating a high quality culturally relevant content here in the UK. I worry that the kite marking style intervention might take a long time to get right, and then
even
then,
an age thing, like with the cinema, there's 15s, there 18s.
Yeah, and I think that
PG.
And I think that becomes down to what is the audience expectations work? Do the platforms enable it? Can they structure? I know that YouTube Kids, for example, has age gating around it as well. Well, not age gating, but age kind of bracketing. But I'm sure it's imperfect because that's the nature of an algorithmically driven platform versus those that have human editors overseeing everything that's put out. And that is the balance. There's an incredible democratization that YouTube offers, but it doesn't have the same level of editorial rigor and oversight that we have. And that's the beauty of the BBC in many ways. But I think to your point around, thank you for promoting our socioeconomic report. I probably haven't talked about it enough. We published it this morning and there's some fantastic findings in there. Yeah. But it does speak to the real challenge, not just in PSBs, but in the UK, of content supply. And I think we do need to see, whilst there is a fantastic ecosystem going outside of the PSB ecosystem, that high quality nutritional content that informs, educates and entertains, at the moment we are, as I think Patricia and Kate said, slightly the last people standing, and we don't want that. We do need intervention now.
You've not monetised your content, but it was interesting to hear that the advertising restrictions, you said, Patricia, have been, is that the unhealthy food stuff? Can you just say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, when we were together in Salford, I think I remember talking to you a little bit about that. That really important legislation did have a very big impact on particularly ITV, and I think that was because obviously CITV that existed previously was able to have advertising that was for chocolate, etc. But obviously once that act came in, then the advertising model changed. And I think we all know that had a very big impact on the children's media industry, because if you can't advertise around that content, then actually you move to content that you can advertise. So hence targeting older audiences on other commercial platforms like CITV, etc. And that's had a very big impact over the last few years. We did talk. When we've since 2010, it's almost halved in terms of the amount of children's content that's being made by PSBs in the UK. We are literally all that's left. We're providing 86% of that.
And that's mirrored in online advertising as well, because of not just in the UK changes, but also copper in the US has driven a large decrease in revenues that are available via.
They've had similar cut,
yeah. So,
right. I was interested. Is it international?
The copper changes are not necessarily. They're more about data sharing, but they've had an impact that it's harder to monetize under 18 content, and that makes the business model is harder, which is one of the reasons I think that we are left as a sort of major supplier, because we have a different business model.
Okay, thanks. So exciting times of the Charter Review and the new DG, whoever that may be.
Indeed.
Exactly. Thank you, Damien.
Thank you. Just if we do these quite quickly, that would be great. Iain, if there is a ban on social media for under 16s, do you anticipate that having an effect on the BBC, and if so, what?
We're considering that actively at the moment to sort of think through the consequences around that. We always offer age-appropriate experiences wherever they are, and so I think we'll go with whatever Parliament decides in that respect. But yeah, it could have a positive impact in certain ways in terms of audience behaviours, and that's something we are looking at.
Okay, Patricia, will there be a change in programming as a result of Vote 16?
Not really, because all the content that we create is made appropriate for each age audience. But what we're doing is we are providing support to children through our education outlets, so bite-sized other side of the story. We're actually investing more in those areas, whether it's supporting children to understand how to navigate the internet, or whether it's supporting them with media literacy, teachers and parents with media literacy.
Can I make a recommendation? Sorry.
Yes.
I had a fascinating conversation with Public First last week, who are doing these focus groups with like 12-year-olds who will be voting if that legislation passed. And for a start, they told me that Newsround, even with 12, 13-year-olds, is still very, very popular, which I thought was really reassuring. They had some really interesting insights about the change in dynamics there and what that's going to mean, I think, going forward. So you might want to consider asking them to give evidence.
Okay, thank you. Do you think, Patricia, older children, teenagers, are well served for news, particularly on television rather than radio?
We know that older children are navigating to BBC News as well as Newsround, as Iain just said.
There's no product for them.
Excuse me?
There's no product. There's news beats on the radio, but what's the product for a 14, 15, 16-year-old?
I mean, something like Instagram.
Or do you say they don't? And maybe the answer is your research says they don't need one. But I'm just interested to know what's the approach.
So
and
again,
why?
our socioeconomic report has some interesting stats around the
and the consultation
news
around
the news impact. But I would say that if you look at our success on TikTok, on Instagram, those are young, skewing younger, not necessarily sort of teenagers per se. When I was at YouTube, I was always struck by how many sort of 14-year-olds would say if they saw a story was too good to be true, they'd go to the BBC News app to check. My concern, of course, is do they know it's too good to be true? But I do think it's widely used, and
but there is no product for them, is there? There is on the radio, but there isn't on telly. And I'm just interested to know if you think that's a gap or we're happy with that. I mean, particularly in the miss and dish information world and the unique role that you play. It sounds like we think things broadly okay.
I think it's all through other platforms rather than linear, frankly.
And can I ask Kate about Tiny Happy People?
Yes.
What went right? What went wrong?
It's gone.
Sorry, you might need to explain what it is or was first.
Tiny Happy People was a fantastic and very, very successful initiative that we started to focus on speech and language support for parents. Because particularly from COVID, we were aware that children
it was initiated before COVID.
It was, but it came in. I think the benefits of it were really very evident in that very tricky time, where parents didn't get access, obviously, to taking their children to nurseries, etc. You didn't have so much socialisation.
Yeah, sorry, forgive me. The genesis was before COVID. It was about 20. It wasn't deployed, but it was created around 2018 or 2017.
Yes,
and it was all about the focus on the home learning environment, which is the kind of missing link in child. Not missing, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
It needs more focus for social mobility, for child development, for early years, and so on.
Yeah. And it was very successful. We work very closely with the NHS, the Department for Education, and what we have done is, because of the success of this, we recognise that we need to give it more prominence. So we've actually brought it in under CBeebies, which is obviously such a well-known, trusted brand with parents, and launched last summer CBeebies Parenting. And this is a digital support network. So we have a website which has all of our digital resources. So a lot of the material from Tiny Happy People, that fantastic campaign, but also on-the-ground events. So a couple of weekends ago, we were at Blackball FC with the English Football League doing a CBeebies Parenting event, where we actually had parents and preschoolers come together and really start to share some of these key information that we have, because we work with trusted experts. whether that's educational consultants or educational psychologists. And it's all about sharing in what is a very difficult time, as you were saying, for hardworking families to actually have the time to spend with their children. So it's actually giving them resources, giving them access to experts about how to support their child's development, whether that's how to tell a bedtime story.
May I just, for a short time, may I ask just as follow-up, can you give us something in writing about kind of numbers, how the programme has grown, how it's changed, and what the future plans are?
Absolutely, yes, we have a lot we can share. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Quick question. So, could you tell me? I understand the importance of the UK content. Coco Melon. Why is that on iPlayer?
Coco Melon is a tactic. It was brought in after we had done some research with families, talking to them about what they were actually consuming, what they wanted to see their children, see. And there was a lot of parents that were saying that there was Coco Melon wasn't in the BBC. They were actually going to YouTube for this content. So we brought it in as a tactic to see how that would actually affect bringing in those audiences that were actually not coming to the BBC. The interesting thing is that it actually really worked. So it not only attracted families that had not been coming to the BBC before, but what we actually saw is how they would actually come to see Coco Melon, and then they would move on to other content that we were commissioning, like Yaketi or Hey Dagi. So basically, that's the reason why we brought it in. But in any case, we hear a lot of people saying how Coco Melon is not really good content and it's bad for you. I don't believe that's the case. And I think it'd be good to actually see some research that proves that, because the way we see it, there's really lovely nursery rhymes with a lot of, thought behind it to make it very family friendly. And we believe that that content is not in any way harmful to children.
Just, why did you feel the need for the focus groups?
We do focus groups all the time.
Okay.
We continuously listen to our audience. For little ones, we have to listen to parents because the little ones are not going to be able to tell us. But we do that. That is something that we do. We test our content. Whenever we launch a new show, we have that tested also with focus
so
groups.
No particular sort of preemptive treatment.
We do it a lot.
Okay.
That's BAU.
Okay, thank you. Right, so Richard Bradley, Horrible Histories co-creator, he was very sort of straight with us when we met him. He said parents might want their kids to sort of go to sort of iPlayer, but kids themselves are sort of ending up in YouTube effectively. So how does the iPlayer growth compare to the growth of BBC's children's content viewing on YouTube?
Well, we're not we haven't currently been measuring the growth of YouTube the same way we have been measuring the growth of iPlayer, because we have been focusing. In the last 5 years, we have been focusing on supporting the move of audiences from linear into iPlayer. And as Iain mentioned, last year alone, we got 2.2 billion views and 750 million hours of children's content alone being watched on iPlayer. Mm-hmm. Every year for the past 5 years, we've had double-digit growth of content being viewed on iPlayer by children. So that's actually not just content being viewed on iPlayer by children, but children's content on iPlayer being viewed by children. And that is a success story. And I don't believe we've finished. I can see, for example, this half term we had a huge amount of children coming to iPlayer, 53, I believe, million streams in just 1 week of children's content. That's the highest ever we have gotten in 1 week. After COVID was the highest number. We've actually kind of outnumbered that. So we can see now a trend of iPlayer really, really taking off. We're really, really pleased with the results. We're really hopeful that if we get support for more prominence of public service content on YouTube, as we're starting to track what we're doing there, that we can add that reach to the great reach that we have currently on iPlayer. So one doesn't take away from the other. I think they can be complementary.
Okay, thank you. Have you considered sort of more partnerships with PSBs?
PSBs within the UK. Well, I believe we're not allowed to actually have co-productions with other PSBs per se. We do a lot of co-productions with Irish PSBs, but not currently with PSBs.
I think enabling more co-commissioning with PSBs is part of, well, enabling better partnerships with PSBs is part of those 5 asks I mentioned that we're looking at. In the kids space, I mean, there has been, the other PSBs, with the exception of 5, have moved out of that space, but we definitely welcome them back.
Okay, brilliant. Kate, is there anything you'd like to add?
Just to add, I think what we're offering, I think that is quite different, is the storytelling. Whether you're doing storytelling for preschoolers or whether you're doing storytelling to retain that exciting 7+ audience as well. And we're working across so many different genres, whether it's animation or live action drama, even live action drama for preschoolers. We're the only broadcaster that is investing in the same kind of way. And we also make content for underserved audiences, which I think sets us apart as well from perhaps either the commercial environment or other PSBs. So we're making content, for instance, just done a show called Tiny Tunes, which is presented by a deaf presenter who is signing with British Sign Language to a group of preschoolers who are learning key BSL signs in nursery rhymes. I'm just mentioning that because it's a very different kind of content. You're asking about what the whole scope is and how the environment. I think it's important that we flag up that we are serving these underserved audiences as well as appealing in a very broad way.
I think what we're trying to get at, Kate, is more how we can work with other PSBs to kind of build the profile of the iPlayer. So, like in January, you announced a new partnership with S4C to sort of build the prominence of Welsh language programming on BBC iPlayer, and I'm interested to know whether there is more capacity for PSB children's content to be gathered together in one place, if that makes sense.
I think we would absolutely welcome that. In fact, we sponsored S4 to actually go to Cartoon Forum. We paid for them to be able to present along with us one of the development that they had we're actually looking for commissioning partners for. So we really do want to have more of the different nations and languages.
And have you had any sort of conversations about how you can attract more PSB content onto the iPlayer? Is that something that you've been discussing?
I would say that's something that is always a consideration, but it has to work for their business models. Yeah. So S4C, for example, recently and decided they wanted to put more onto us, and we have asked Ofcom to enable advertising there. Yeah. We're in active discussion there. That obviously will cannibalise their own platform, and that's the decision I think F4C felt it was the right thing to do, as long as we can reassure them around our own sort of discoverability on our own platforms for Welsh language users in particular, and that was a win-win for us. If other PSBs are open to that, we're absolutely open to do so.
I was also a bit concerned about this comment that you're not measuring the growth of watching on YouTube. Is that because it's difficult to do? Is that because YouTube aren't very forthcoming with the data?
I think it's more that our focus, until we launched this new YouTube strategy in January, our focus has been on growing on iPlayer, as Patricia talked about. Yeah. I think we get about 55 million views a month on YouTube, so we're able to look at our channels. One of the things that actually I've discussed before, I think there's been a challenge for creators as well as for sort of traditional broadcasters like ourselves with YouTube, is understanding how you're getting a percentage of audience share. They give you fantastic data on your own channel and on your own performance, don't necessarily give you a sense of how you're doing compared to the wider pool of, say, UK users. So there's a bit of a challenge there where I think we could get greater visibility as part of any kind of agreement with YouTube, and I'm sure it's the case with others as well. But it's not that we're not tracking it, it's that I think we're only now at the sort of foothills of that really aggressive strategy to grow. Yeah. But it's all predicated on meeting the underserved audience that we feel needs to, and I think it's something like 46% of 4 to 15-year-olds are using YouTube every week. So we obviously have to be there, and we have to, and we want to grow there, but it's still early in terms of the metrics.
Okay, well, I want to talk to you about one of your global phenomenons now, Bluey, with Vicky.
Yeah, so just a simple question, but how much money does the BBC earn from Bluey, and how much goes back into BBC's children's TV and education?
So I don't know if I've got this. In our annual report, we set out the BBC Studios piece, and it is worth saying that it's not an individual sort of payout from Bluey then goes into children's education. It adds to the profits of BBC Studios, and then BBC Studios shares a dividend with public service. So it's true to say that Bluey has been an enormous commercial success, and that has helped BBC Studios growth. And that has been of benefit to the public service, but we don't hypothecate it in that way.
All right, so you don't know how much is made from Bluey?
I'll get you that specific stat, 'cause I think we did publish it. I don't want to say it wrong.
Okay, no, that would be really helpful. But the money that you get from Bluey goes into a pot rather than directly.
Well, it goes into it's part of Studio's annual kind of reconciliation in terms of the revenues that we're doing, and we've had phenomenal success with it. Part of Kate may want to talk about the great work that the Studios team have done to develop the IP there and to expand more on what is Australian broadcasting PSB content in the first instance, but specifically on how it goes into BBC Children's, it's not hypothecated and then put across. It's part of the revenues that are raised and then profits that are driven into a dividend that then goes into public service.
Can I add something to that? It's important to note that we do not commission Bluey. Bluey is basically a deal that BBC Studios has with ABC Australia and Ludo Studios. So we do not invest heavily on Bluey. It's an acquisition for us. When we have invested in other content like on Hidalgo or number blocks or horrible histories, we do then get a back-end position in terms of that money comes back, and we actually are seeing revenues coming back into children's. It's not huge, but we do get that revenue coming back to us.
Do you get money from Bluey?
Not from Bluey, because we're not commissioning Bluey. Bluey is not a commission. We don't invest directly into Bluey as BBC Children's and Education.
No, but
you don't make any money.
Studios gets
does.
it. Yeah, Studios gets it, and then it as Iain was explaining, is part of all of the revenue that comes back to the BBC.
Okay, so the BBC is seen as a global leader in commissioning children's TV. And so why has the BBC not produced another show as successful as Bluey?
Oh my God, if I knew that answer, I would be a millionaire by now. It's so difficult. These are unicorns. They come around once every 10, 15 years. What was the one before? It was Paw Patrol, then there was Peppa Pig, and even Teletubbies was one of them. That was a huge success for the BBC back then, and actually, I believe, instigated consumer products and all kinds of different, divisions to be born out of studios. So it is very difficult, but in order for us to find that next unicorn, we need to invest. We need to be able to continue developing content at scale to be able to find that next Bluey, and that's a well-funded BBC will do that.
Yes. Which of the other children's titles in the BBC Studios portfolio are closest to getting what Bluey does, or coming close to that?
None of them, but actually Hidalgo is our second most profitable franchise. We call them franchises when they can, bring those revenues extra than just viewing. And we have invested heavily on Hidalgo, both as public service and as studios.
Yeah, if I can just add, Hidalgo, in the first 6 months of this financial year, it's racked up in 25-26. It racked up 105 million views on iPlayer. That is massive, and it's really exciting when I look at the data stats for what the UK audience is watching on the BBC. To sit there in the whole list of everything that's up there, and you've got Traitors, and you've got Gladiators, you've got Hidalgo, and it's up there often in the top 3, top 4.
And then the final one in this section, but how has the co-production model affected the ability of BBC Studios to develop shows and retain the IP?
So, as I said before, co-production is very important. It's even more important for BBC Studios because we're not going to fully fund anything coming from BBC Studios unless it's something that is absolutely completely local and doesn't have that international appeal. So they really rely on co-productions, and they're taking a lot of risks right now. Our latest drama, Crookhaven, which is a really exciting, when you see it, you're going to love it, because it's a really exciting new drama for children and their families. BBC Studios hasn't found yet that co-production partners, but they have gone out of their way to invest quite a lot of money of their own pockets because they believe that they can actually, find those co-production partners. But that's the reality of the situation. It's hard to find them, and you have to take risks.
Thank you, Vicky. It's Bio, isn't it? Next. Oh no, it's Rupa.
Yeah, me again.
Sorry.
Out of interest, popular music, the bit I used to work in of your corporation, has that just disappeared from the children's schedules?
Absolutely not, and I let Kate talk about music because she's a musician herself. She loves music.
Yeah, no, we love everything to do with music, and I think it's incredibly important that music and the arts is part of content for children, particularly preschoolers. We have
pop music. I'm just thinking my algorithm shows me 80s bands, and they're often on your shows. Traitors Plays Pop, Run Around.
Yeah, and we have
anymore?
There is a lot of use of pop music in content for children. It's important that children are exposed to the whole wide range of music styles. So it's not so much one genre like pop music, but we also have a show like Musical Storyland, which is showing lots of different stories from around the world and different cultural types of music as well that goes with that.
But I wouldn't find a Smiths video the equivalent of that on any of your shows now. I think that, as I say, these people used to appear on mainstream kiddie programmes, and I think that's gone. Am I right?
I think it's a lot to do with obviously licensing and the cost of licensing music content as well.
But I would say that, for example, on audio, our radio products, we've got a huge amount we're expanding, and for example, Radio 1 introducing, we do which has a sort of audience.
Across the corporation it is there, but not within the children's. Right. But I'm meant to be asking about Newsround. So how do you make sure that it's big in your report, that it's one of the crown jewels, it's trusted, lifeline, all this stuff in a sector that's under pressure. How do you make sure it remains relevant when there's so much other intense competition out there?
Well, as we were saying, Newsround, it continues to be watched by more than 3.5 million children on a weekly basis. It's actually, introduced in the majority of schools to primary school age children. But what we have done,
that's a constant,
and that's a constant. And actually, we can actually see it growing. So one of the things, there's a couple of things we've done. We have moved Newsround into online, into YouTube. We have a daily bulletin on YouTube currently, which is quite complicated because you have to put it on and then take it off because you don't want to have a bulletin that is out of date. So we do that. We have that. We have actually seen an increase in the traffic that we have on our YouTube channel for Newsround. Over 40, I believe it's 45 million views of that channel last year. So that we're really, really pleased with that. But also what we did last year is we basically, Newsround used to be done in-house by Children's. We moved it on to BBC News. And the reason we've done that is because we believe that BBC News has the scale to make Newsround bigger than it actually currently is, and although it's quite big already. We are commissioners of that. So from an editorial point of view, Newsround continues to be a news program made for children with children in mind. But with the scale of BBC News behind it, with all that strength, we can actually have much bigger impact with Newsround.
Yeah, we went to ITN and saw something similar. They've got some sort of I don't know, small programme, because if it's too long, you lose people's attention.
Rundown.
That's made by ITN.
Yeah, the Rundown, it's called. It's for slightly older.
Yeah.
I mean, I would, and to Damien's question earlier, I think for older audiences as well, we think about, younger audiences, but sort of teenagers or pre-teens, think about the what we're doing, both the BBC News app. I mean, you saw this weekend an enormous amount of appetite from all audiences, particularly younger audiences actually, to understand what was happening with the US-Israel Iran conflict. 56 million page views so far, for example, on our main app. So there's and what we do on TikTok and what we do with Instagram and others, there's a huge part of in the round, but News Round continues to be our sort of crown jewel in that respect. And I think that combination of the best BBC News insight, intelligence, infrastructure, and the Kids at Heart commissioning is what makes it so trusted. And our report does have some fantastic data about how parents trust us and how much they do it. But I'm always struck as well when my son comes home from school and starts talking about various world events. I'm like, where on earth do you get that from? And of course, it's from News Round, right? Because teachers are choosing to put that in front of them.
Seen it in school.
Yeah, I was going to say it's very associated with the old school assembly. That even in my day, I think they would wheel in the enormous television on legs.
It's not one curriculum, they choose to do it, which I think is interesting itself. 3.5 million kids watching it through school, and teachers are choosing to put it on, which
that boosts that figure of 3.5 million.
Well, it's large. It's a lot of it is driven by. I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about the numbers online or on linear, but actually the huge drive is through the school network.
Have you got an active plan to grow that?
Yes.
I mean, to
So that's as I said, moving it to be produced now by BBC News also means that BBC News is also supporting and promoting News Round in a very different way than they did in the past. Also using their own news reporters, that have faces that are very well known, and leveraging on being out there, because they can actually go and interview children in different places where they are, where we might not have sent our own news reporters to. So there's a lot more that is happening now that we have moved the production over there. But we're still commissioning it, so we're still in charge of making sure that the editorial stays focused for children.
Do you get any recognition or thanks or money from the Department of Education for all this?
So we get thanks. But I think we have a publicly funded body, right? And this is the core part of one of our missions and public purposes. I mean, it's literally educate and inform and educate, right? But there's also, particularly on, I think it's Public Purpose 2, which thinks about education and our role in news as well in Public Purpose 1. So I would say that is part of the licence fee. I'm not pitching specifically for a DFE funding, but if such funding became available, I'm sure we'd welcome it.
And sort of, is part of your mission to be countering disinformation and misinformation?
Huge amount. And I think that's a key pillar of the Charter Review response we're making in the next week. Where the BBC steps in, we've seen, particularly for younger audiences, but across the UK, that an increasingly polarised society, this idea that news becomes contested, that also that people are seeking out news they want rather than news they need. And I think the value of the BBC as a trusted media provider that continues to have both a universal product but also high levels of trust, that is massive. And I think we have a responsibility not just in the UK but globally to grow our reach. And I think we've talked a lot about the YouTube partnership when it comes to news in it's kids, but there's also a pillar which is all about news, where our goal is to be the number one news provider of English language content.
And in the factual sphere, would you ever do anything like kids reality shows?
We have semi-reality shows. We've got something called The Next Step. I don't know if you know about that content.
It's too old in our house now. The Next Step.
And we have Stage Stars. Do you want to talk about that one? That is actually quite...
Yeah, Stage Stars, which is it's a factual. It's set in Tring School for Performing Arts, and it follows fantastic young talent like dancers, actors, and musicians and wannabe pop artists as they progress through the school year, and they're going on. So you're seeing rehearsals, etc. So it is structured reality, but it's a fabulous show. It's worth having a look. It's on iPlayer.
And it's worth saying, for example, with a long history in this, if you think about Eurovision Kids, for example, there's a piece there. The key thing, of course, is that as a public service broadcaster, all responsible broadcasters need to think there is a particularly higher bar when you're using child actors or when you're using child contestants. So we always think through that piece. I think it's important that we do appropriately and responsibly.
And sort of your relationship with TikTok, because it's actually banned in this building. The server won't allow it. It stops you. And on our parliamentary devices, so I just wondered about that, because that's for the post-13-year-olds, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's really important that TikTok, that we offer age-appropriate content only on TikTok. We're not trying to get sort of under 13 sort of in there. Yeah, but I think we do have a role to play. As I said, we're doing a lot on news there, where it feels like the need for trusted information and news is really important. There is a underserved audience that is using TikTok more than is using iPlayer, for example. So we have taken the responsibility there. But specifically on kids, I don't know if there's anything you want to say.
Well, we do have a bite size for GCSE students, so that's beyond 13, and when it's revision time. But we also have other side of the story, which is that bite-sized service to support children with understanding misinformation and disinformation. So those are the two main things that we actually have on TikTok. We don't target any kids under 13 in that platform.
Okay, and just yes, no. Can you ever really be unbiased? Because surely the selection of the stories of what goes in is demonstrating some sort of bias. I don't know if it's ever possible. The reason why Trump pulled out of Sesame Street is that he said that it was partisan, or public service broadcasting.
We have a duty to be impartial, so...
It's just the selection of the show. Do you know what I mean? You can never really detach yourself as a social scientist.
I think the committee heard a lot about systemic bias in the BBC before Christmas, so I wouldn't add much more to that.
Always question Big Bird's politics. We never know. Thank you very much, Rupert. Last but not least, Vicky.
I'm just going to do a quick one on TikTok, if that's okay. So you were talking about different platforms and their responsibilities and so forth earlier, and you didn't name kind of those platforms. But in terms of the BBC and publishing on TikTok, recently we've seen the school wars, blue versus red, on TikTok, which I think is absolutely terrifying. I think that TikTok did not respond quick enough to go and tackle this. Indeed, still are not responding quick enough. But what responsibility do you think that you have as the BBC in terms of a publisher on TikTok?
Well, as I said before, we will not target children under 13, but our responsibility is to make sure that children that are there that see our content are going to be influenced in a positive way. So that's why we've got Other Side of the Story, which basically is tackling misinformation and disinformation right at the heart of TikTok. So what we actually tell children there is, this is a fake news, or this is something you should be looking out for. So it actually helps educate that audience. So that's what we can do. And then, of course, we have also some of our GCSE revision times, because we know that students, when it comes to GCSE, they actually do go to these platforms to revise.
I think I can address the question, Vicky. I think the challenge here is whether by putting BBC content onto TikTok we're giving it more credibility or not. I think the way we would look at it is that we've got a duty to reach audiences where they are. And I think we've seen, as audiences' behaviour change, that we need to step up and provide, in those information spaces where there are challenges, provide trusted information. So that's the decision we've taken. We can always keep that under advisement, but there is definitely a question here about, there's fantastic content on all these platforms. TikTok, we talked a lot about YouTube earlier. There's brilliant creators doing some amazing things. It probably brings us back a little bit to discoverability, because if we upload this content and it's good quality content, are we confident that it will be found by UK users? And particularly in that world where only 20% of UK content is being seen, it's really important that we're not just there, but we're also able to be found.
So in particular, in terms of this one, it wasn't disinformation, it wasn't misinformation, it was dangerous information. And so I guess kind of my point is are you putting the content out in terms of that platform to kind of advise in terms of
So actually tackling those trends, for example, I see.
Yes.
I'll check on that. I'm not aware of that particular trend, but that's the sort of thing that BBC Verify does a lot of, actually. And I think if you think about where we're trying to address current negative trends or themes or kind of content areas, that does tend to be in the space of less around the school dynamics. But I'll check and I'll let you know if there was anything particularly we did on that issue. And thank you for raising it. I'm happy to flag it to our teams.
Yeah.
Then if I come on to what my question is, I'm trying to shoehorn 3 questions into one because I wanted to get away with asking the other question. But how does being outside London affect commissioning decisions? Also ensuring that it's supporting independent TV. And what's the perception of the audience? And in children's TV, what are you doing to ensure that we represent all parts of the United Kingdom, and in particular people from working class backgrounds?
So I'll answer first, and maybe then Kate can add to that. But 80% of our output for children's content is outside of London. So that's already something that is very important. We also make sure that we have representation and great diversity in children's content. And actually the BBC Children's is known worldwide, known for how high it actually, represents diversity. Because it is really important that children see themselves represented. That is our part of our values. We need to make sure that children see themselves represented on screen. So that's our main focus, whether it's accents or ethnicity or disabilities or actually even where they live. We also think about making sure that cities like Edinburgh or like Manchester are represented in the content that we produce, and Kate will talk a bit more about that. But also a very important thing is how we support the creative industry across the whole of the UK. We work very closely with Screens to make sure that whenever we go to the different nations and regions, we work in tandem with them to find the best talent and to grow the talent that they're also trying to grow over there. But we also have our own investment in talent and in different diversity across the UK.
Yeah, just to add quickly, so in the last 12 months, we've filmed in locations such as Liverpool, Halifax, Leeds, Hexham, Darlington, Newton Ards in Northern Ireland, Belfast, Glasgow, and even the Isle of Mull. And within that, it's authentic representation. It's also, as Patricia was saying, working with those local communities, bringing in workforce, giving them opportunities. So even on Balamory, which we were filming on the Isle of Mull, we ended up bringing in workers to get their first experience of working in television from the Inner Hebrides. And there can't be that much opportunity if you want to work in media if you're growing up there. So we are, uniquely, I think, positioned to support across the whole of the UK. And we also, in terms of representation, we are, it's so important that we are telling UK stories. One example I would say I'd just like to bring is Crompton from the amazing Alex Wheatle. That was a really groundbreaking drama that we produced. And it's set in a multicultural estate, really showing social economic diversity. And it's actually showing, the story is all about how children growing up are navigating social politics, peer pressure and identity. And so you've got real authentic representation in shows like that.
Just a data point, the children's education team meets our 25% target of socioeconomic employment. So that's obviously very encouraging. I think also, just back to the charter lens, how the BBC can be more it's children's education is leading the way here, but I think how the BBC can be more rooted in our communities across the UK is very much a focus of the executive and the board, and you'll hear more from us on that in the next week.
Very good. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, everybody, for appearing in front of us today. I know we've gone wildly over time, but it was really, really great to hear your thoughts on such a big range of subjects. And please, can you send us all the information that we discussed earlier? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Order.